Welcome back, huh?
Right.
So, this is my first official meeting as president. Yeah. And like to always start out with a joke, but I've already ruined the joke. Tal, we had the winter meeting a couple of days ago. You said how many days till spring training? 40 something?
Oh, I'll have to recompute. Right now it'd be in the 40s, I would guess.
Okay. All right. Let's hope we have spring training, right? So, as Tal said at the meeting, both sides know what the stakes are. So let's hope they get together. Before we officially get started, though, as all of you know, I took over for a man that I met in 2010. And I met him at Astros Fan Fest. What was it really a fan fest? It was that last spring training game. The Astros Blue Jays 2010.
Yeah.
They had done it? Okay. And I just happened to be walking by and I saw this booth that said SABR on it. You know? And I love sports. And that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was in college to get a degree in history, but I wanted to write about baseball because my entire life has been about studying baseball. And I decided my whole life was going to be about studying baseball because pretty much after T-ball, I figured out I wasn't going to be a major league player. So, you know, I was okay hitting the ball up the stick, but when people started throwing at me, yeah, I don't know. So, but anyway, I met Bob and a couple of people. I won a trivia contest. It was, I think I got 3 questions right. It's going to be a few times in the entire time I've been at SABR that I've actually won a trivia contest. And I've been here for, 11 years now, so I'm in a room full of experts, so every once in a while. But you asked me about the 86 Astros. I think I won that one. So, good about that group. But before we really get started today, I have some big shoes to fill. All right, we all know Bob. He's president of this chapter for the last 18 years. And I just, hey, how's it going? And I just really felt like, you know, I just hope I do half as good as Bob did for the last 18 years. But I guess before we get to that, let's welcome, we have some visitors here. Okay, and a few of you just met. So we have Diane and Lauren Langdon.
Yeah.
Lauren is actually a student at U of H downtown. So, hey, go Cougs. Right? We have Nick Thornquist and Megan McCroskey. You don't recognize that last name? Well, hey, Mr. Mike McCroskey. So, and I forgot your name. Tim Healy. Tim Healy. The reason Tim Healy found out about this meeting is his son was in my history class last year. The fact that he's here, I didn't know if I was in trouble. He was like, hey, I really wanted to come and check it out because my son told me about SABR. So, join tonight. We would love to have you. In fact, all of you. We'd love to have all of you. We just love to talk baseball. That's all we really like to do. And we also have a special guest, very special guest tonight. Someone I am very fond of because I grew up a radio guy. All right, but we'll get more to him here in a second. But we do have, of course, Robert Ford and his daughter, Elena. Right? Okay, now that I got those introductions out the way, Mr. McCann, Bob, come up here for a second, please. I know you don't like this, but hey, Bob. We thought Bob and I sort of got together. We didn't really tell anybody. Yeah. And we are very fortunate to know you. And we just thought we would get you something, you know, as sort of a going away gift. Thank you. Well, going away, you're not really going anywhere. It's sort of a thank you gift, appreciation for everything you've ever done for me personally, for Bob, and this entire chapter, and really for the people, the city of Houston. You know, bringing SABR, making SABR larger, this whole community. I think you had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely.
You know, so yes, got you a little bit.
Okay, and small little speech. I was reading this book about this fellow who played first base for Yale, named George Herbert Walker Bush. And then I was reading this book, had all the speeches in there, including his acceptance speech back in 1988 at the Republican Convention. He said, "We're a nation of community, of thousands and thousands of religious, social, business, community organizations spread across the country, do all kinds of things. Brilliant diversity, spread like stars, over 1,000 points of light across broad and peaceful sky." And I think about what you've done about SABR. You know, it's our little point of life. You know, this happy room once a month, getting together, talking about baseball, learning about baseball, and for the SABR chapter here in Houston, you're the key to this for the past 18 years. And this fellow, if I understand it right, you moved to Houston like in 1990 or so? 86. Okay. Didn't know a soul with the Astros, but the Astros, like, through his, you know, personal interest in baseball and his ability to meet people and to get to know people and being a great guy, you know, he's not only president of our chapter, with the Astros, he's on their Hall of Fame selection committee. You know, that just shows the kind of guy he is. And I'm pleased to be your friend, proud to be your friend. And so, on behalf of the chapter, we got you this gift. Thank you. And you can, I think, she'll open it up. Okay. As soon as I ordered it, I realized, or actually when it came in, I realized how large it is. I started thinking about his study at his house, which is jam full of great baseball things. He's got like seats from the Astrodome. He's got someone.
Christian rescue.
Let's not have Astros here. Hopefully you'll find room for this. Hold out in here. And it's here. Yeah, bubble wrap really well. I will pull apart later on. Anyway, it says something was right.
That's very cool.
Very nice. Very nice.
Because they had my grandkids out here taking that. Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Help here.
No, sorry, we can help. Okay.
See. Chapter President 2004 2021.
Thank you,
For our
Rob.
chapter.
Thank you, Joe.
I know you didn't love anything, but we could come on. Come on.
Hey, it's been a real thrill for me. I got to tell you, I've met so many good people, and this chapter has been so active. I've done so many good things, writing books and hosting a convention and doing a barrage at there. Barrage is that word. I'm kind of halfway speechless, but thank you for all of you, for all you've done for me in the 18 years. Go Astros. All right.
Very quickly, January 8th, they had the 16th annual Bill Gilbert winter meeting. You know, Tal was a guest speaker. Professional umpire Perry Barber and Round Rock Express GM Tim Jackson and Director of Broadcasting Mike Capps. And there was a great presentation from a chapter member, Dan Walsh, talking about the history of baseball through postage stamps. Talk a little bit more about that at the end. But I thought we would kind of start out, and before I introduce our special guest, because I kind of want maybe to get his thoughts on this too. But they do a Hall of Fame vote every year. Okay, the whole chapter, and they're pretty accurate as to who actually gets in the Hall of Fame. Because the presentation is the announcement was the 25th, 26th,
25th.
25th. Okay, so from and this is directly from the 30 submitted ballots, none of the players reached the 75% threshold to trigger election. Okay, the closest one was David Ortiz with 73.33%. 22 out of 30 people voted. Two other players reached 50%. Clemens with 53.33 and Barry Bonds with 50%. Right now, that's the top six for Kurt Schilling, 46.67%, Scott Rowland, and Billy Wagner. Both had 40%. Two voters opted for none. To be elected to the ballot. So I don't know. We could talk about that later or whatever. I don't know. I think from the latest results that I'm seeing, the latest votes, looks like maybe Big Papi's the only one that might get it. I don't know. Maybe. So, but without further ado, Bill Brown is going to introduce our special guest. But before he does, I would just like to say, on a personal note, when I was a kid, I didn't have cable. I grew up in the country, okay, north of town. Y'all know where Conroe is, cut and shoot area. It's where I grew up, all right? I was fortunate at times that the Astros could be on Channel 20. You know, this is the late 70s and into the 80s. But every night during the summer, I would turn on that radio and I would listen to Gene Elston. Later on, when I went for the service, came back, it was Milo. Okay, we had a couple of people take over, and those guys are really how I fell in love with baseball. The radio guys. Okay, I lived in Spokane, Washington, so I listened to the Seattle broadcaster in the 90s. I lived in the Bay Area, listened to John Miller for a while, and it's really radio, which is how I love baseball, how I fell the way. And then, of course, it's the great Vin Scully. But our guy tonight, you know, I was a little nervous at first, Bob, but his tone and the way he does things, he gets so excited. You know, he has that catchstring. See you later. See you later. I just love that stuff. It's the reason I prefer, to this day, listening to Astros on the radio. Not to say Bill Brown.
History, don't worry about it.
But I just love the radio and what Bob has done, stepping into some big shoes. So 2 Hall of Fame guys and a couple of guys since then. I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me summers of excitement again, even through all the crap that we've had to deal with.
Well, it was your Todd Dallas told me you said you love TV. Thank you.
But without further ado, Brown.
Go.
Okay.
Well, you've already stolen part of mine. What more can I say? But Tal and I keep calling Tal every day for about an hour. He is just totally sick of me right now. But we were talking about when he was growing up in the Boston area. And when he was 7 years old, he was captivated by baseball on the radio and a guy named Jim Britt. Jim Britt, back in those days, was doing the Boston games. He did World Series, right, Tal, and some big national. So it's easier to understand, you know, how that could happen in 1940. Things have changed so doggone much. But then kind of bridging the years, when I was in Cincinnati and I was doing TV, and we would do, you know, maybe 35 games a year at that point. So radio was still king, very much king. And it was certainly king in Cincinnati. And, you know, when they had Marty Brenneman and Joe Nuxall, and people just did not watch TV, believe it or not. You know, I had a few people who would come up to me and say, oh, we don't really, we have the game on, but we don't listen to you guys because it turns the sound down and listen to radio. And that's, you know, it was one of those markets. People were very old fashioned.
they loved the game. If they had a preference, many of them would prefer to sit out on the back patio on a summer night and listen to the radio. And that is certainly a preference that is understandable. After all, it's the radio broadcaster who teaches you the game when you're young. He explains things to you. He has more time to do this. He's not worried about replays and, promos. No, there are few promos. Anyway, but it's certainly captivating, and that's the word Tal used to describe how he fell in love with baseball. Vin Scully uses that same terminology. He would actually lie down. And any of you have the old, no, nobody's as old as I am in this room. Any of you have the big radio sets that were about chest high, and people would actually lie down on the floor and listen to games on the radio. It's hard to imagine that now, but we did it. And then I'd have my little transistor, and I'd have Jack Buck right there near my pillow, and Mom would come in and say, "Are you asleep?" "Yeah, I'm close to being asleep, Mom." And I think millions of people did this. It became ingrained. It became something that was a part of your evening or afternoon routine to listen to your guys on the radio. And they painted the picture for you. And that's what one of the assets, and there are many that Robert has, is the ability to do that. And a radio broadcaster, to be in the elite quality and to be a major league everyday broadcaster, must be able to paint the picture. That's a talent. That's a talent. And, a lot of the descriptiveness is gone in our world today, listening to things on the radio. But he has it. He has that ability to do it. He came here in 2013, as you know. He'd been in Kansas City. He was a Syracuse guy, so great schooling. And we've talked about that. But how many people, so I'm a Mizzou guy, or whatever the school might be, get this degree, this treasured degree from this great school of journalism, and they're not major league broadcasters, or they're not network people. And that's not to say they haven't done something maybe even better. Maybe they own the station. I don't know, but there is a lot of competition. He is one of 30 people in the world who does this job for a team every night, play-by-play. And when you have that mantle attached to you and you've worked so hard your whole life to get it, it becomes a responsibility. He wears that responsibility very well. I haven't met anybody in broadcasting who works any harder than Robert Ford, and he is just fantastic at every phase of the game. Tells you exactly what's going on, reminds you of the score, tells you man on base, who's batting, where the pitch was. He checks all the boxes that you want from a baseball broadcaster. And he's well on his way to being right up there in the upper echelon for an entire career. He's still too young to want to fast forward to that, but he's definitely on that track. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Ford.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for that introduction, Brownie. I appreciate it. I was thinking about, because Brownie told me he was going to introduce me, and I was thinking about the first time I ever met Bill Brown, and I think I've told Brownie this. I remember the date, because that's how monumental it was, not necessarily because of Brown, but the date was December 10th, 2012. That was the day that I interviewed for the Astros radio job. I had worked 7 years in the minor leagues for a few different teams, calling games. I, at the time, hadn't finished 4 years in Kansas City, working for the Royals flagship station, doing the pregame and postgame shows, getting questions every night on the postgame call-in show, like, will the Royals ever win? And the answer was yes when I leave. So the Astros job was the first major league play-by-play job I ever interviewed for, and still is the only major league play-by-play job I've interviewed for. And so the way it all went down, when I was in Kansas City, I took that job because I felt like, even though I wasn't going to be doing play-by-play of baseball on the radio, I felt, well, maybe getting into a major league market and working around a major league team and learning about covering a major league team on a daily basis, I felt like that might help me eventually become a play-by-play broadcaster. But that was always the goal. I would, you have to submit demos for these jobs. And back in the day, it was a cassette. I'm actually old enough that my first demos when I was getting minor league jobs were actually on a cassette. At this point, they were on a CD. Nowadays, you just email a link to somebody. I used to sit and watch Royals games. I didn't travel with the team, although I covered all the games. But I was at all the home games in Kansas City at Kauffman Stadium. And I would watch the games from an empty radio booth, which actually is right next to where the visiting radio booth is at Kauffman Stadium. And I was usually in there by myself, sometimes when somebody else from the radio station would be there. But a handful of times a year, I'd bring a recorder and do play-by-play into a recorder, just so I'd always have demo material, always have a reel, as we like to say, even though no one actually uses reels anymore. And so it was off of that I picked a couple of innings that sounded halfway decent. At least I thought they sounded halfway decent. And when the Astros job was open, I sent them into the Astros. And I remember it was like late November, and I was hearing from friends of mine in the business who had also applied for the Astros job that, they were getting rejection letters. And I hadn't got one. So I'm like, well, either mine is coming soon or maybe I'm not getting one. Who knows? But I remember getting a phone call in late November from Larry Stokes, who at the time was the head of human resources for the Astros. And he told me, we're interested in talking to you further about the Astros radio broadcast position. When can we fly you into Houston? And at that point in my life, I had been in the state of Texas exactly twice. I'd gone to Thanksgiving in Austin once with some family friends, and also went to San Antonio on that trip when I was in college. And actually, right before I got that phone call, at the time, I was also doing radio basketball play-by-play for Nebraska Omaha, and they had played a game at Texas Tech in Lubbock, which was the first time I ever saw tumbleweeds in my life. I'd been to Texas twice in my life, had never been to Houston. So December 10th, 2012, I flew to Houston to interview for the Astros job. Now, December 9th, 2012, a couple of things happened that day. One was, like I said, I was doing basketball games in Nebraska Omaha. The night of December 9th, 2012, they played a basketball game at Iowa State up in Ames, I was living in Kansas City. It was about a 3.5 hour drive. And while I was driving back from doing that game, knowing I have an early morning flight the next day to Houston, interview for a big league job, something I've wanted forever, the Kansas City Royals made a trade for James Shields and Wade Davis from Tampa Bay. And I was a Royals reporter, so don't text and drive, but I was on my phone, on Twitter, tweeting stuff about the trade as I got one hand on the wheel, going down whatever interstate it was in Iowa and through Missouri, and I remember, because I actually went back not too long ago and looked back to see what time those tweets were that I sent. They were like at midnight and 11:30 at night after I called this basketball game. And so I got back to Kansas City in the wee hours of the morning, and then had to get up for, I think it was like a 7 a.m. flight to Houston the next day. And I go to Minute Maid Park, and I wound up interviewing with, and some of them were group interviews, some of them were individual, but I wound up interviewing with, my memory serves, 13 different people. And again, some were groups, some were not. But the first interview I was in was with Larry Stokes, the head of HR, and Bill Brown. And I knew who Brownie was because I was a student of broadcasting, and, had been a baseball fan my whole life and always paid attention to the broadcasts. So I knew who Brownie was, and I knew he'd been in Houston for a long time. And and I just remember Brownie was so intimidating because Brownie may have asked like one or two questions, but he was like, it felt like he was staring a hole through me. Like just kind of looking at me over his glasses while I spoke, like, know about this guy. So it's kind of funny to think back to that initial meeting. And, now, Brownie's become a good friend and has become a mentor as well. And, I'm privileged to say that, we were able to work together, on Astros broadcast at the same time, obviously Brownie on TV and me on radio. And we actually did do a few spring training games together, if memory serves. So, and we've done some radio games during the regular season together as well. So, but yeah, that was the first time I met Brownie. And that day was a whirlwind. Yes, I interviewed with Jim Crane that day in his office, and that was more, Jim basically was telling me about his vision for the team. And, we're going to try and get prospects and build up the farm system. And, it was more Jim selling me on Jim and on the Astros. Whereas, I was if they offered me the job, I was going to take it no matter what. Like it's like, wait, how many games are you going to win next year? That wasn't a good start. George Pistolos, who was the team president at the time, that was another interview. Yeah, it was an absolute whirlwind. But there are two people who are responsible for me being in Houston. So these are the people who deserve the credit or the blame, depending on your point of view. One of them was one of the people that I interviewed with that day. His name is Brian Erickson, and he still is the head of AM programming for what was then Clear Channel, now iHeartMedia, which is basically in Houston is 790, which KBME, which our games are on, and 740 KTRH, which of course the Astros were on forever and still are on occasion. So Brian Erickson's in charge of those two stations here in Houston. And he was one of the people who filtered through the demo CDs that the Astros got for their radio opening. And he listened to mine, and he told the Astros, you need to hire this guy. And I remember when I interviewed with him that day, December 10th, 2012, he was basically like, you can relax. I think you should have the job. Don't worry. I think you sound great. How are you doing? Tell me more. It was super laid back. So Brian was the one who kind of picked my CD out of the pile. And then the other person responsible for being in Houston with the Astros is Jim Crane. Because what wound up happening was there were that day several other people interviewed. Jeff Blum interviewed that day. Steve Sparks interviewed that day. Actually, Sparks had already interviewed at that point. But they interviewed some, few people that day, as I'm sure Brownie may or may not remember. It came down to, for the radio play-by-play job, it came down to me and another broadcaster with a lot more experience. We've been with a few different teams. Most of the executive team, the people who had sat through the interviews, and listened to the demos and what have you, they wanted to hire the more experienced broadcaster. And because I hadn't done any Major League Baseball play-by-play. And Jim Crane is like, well, what's wrong with Robert Ford? So I guess they had this meeting. After the meeting, and Brian Erickson's the one who's told me this, by the way, which is how I know this. So after that meeting, Jim Crane calls Brian Erickson, says, tell me why you like Robert Ford. So he told him, and Jim said to him, well, I think I'm going to hire him. And if this doesn't work out, I'm blaming you. Brian started laughing, and Jim Crane goes, I'm not kidding. So, it's been 10 years now, so I guess it's going to be my 10th year in 2022. So I guess it's worked out okay. But yeah, those are the two people most responsible for me, even coming to Houston and getting the Astros job. But yeah, it was, and then I got hired in February, and it was the day before Valentine's Day 2013 when they announced myself and Steve Sparks as the new broadcast team for the Astros. We met roughly 5 minutes before they announced us as the new radio broadcast team for the Astros. We hadn't known each other at all. And that's wound up being a great partnership and a great marriage, really, between the two of us. But yeah, they had no idea what they were going to get when they put the two of us together, because we had never worked together and didn't know each other at all. Yeah, that day, we get introduced, and then maybe a week later, I'm driving from Kansas City to Houston and then flying to Kissimmee, Florida, where the Astros had spring training at the time, calling spring training games for a team that I'd never seen before, and a team that had a lot of players most people hadn't heard of, and a team that had a new manager, Bo Porter, who decided that he wasn't going to have last names on the back of spring training jerseys because, according to Bo, these guys need to earn the name on the back. So all he did was make my job harder. Yeah, and that first year, obviously in 2013, as I'm sure pretty much everyone in this room knows, was not a banner year for the Astros. As a matter of fact, it was the exact opposite. The Astros losing 111 games and setting a franchise record. But even still, I knew that, this is where I wanted to be, and I was still happy to be in the big leagues. It probably helped that the Astros lost 111 games my first year in the big leagues, as opposed to later on in my career. Hopefully, that never happens again. It's still a joy to call big league baseball and to call baseball in general. And I think one thing that really helped me, especially those first couple of years when the Astros weren't very good, was my first year broadcasting baseball was in 2002 in Yakima, Washington, for the Yakima Bears. They're an Arizona Diamondbacks affiliate in the Northwest League, which was a short season league. We played 76 games in 80 days. I got that job at the winter meetings, which were in Boston in December of 2011, or I'm sorry, December of 2001. And got hired at the winter meetings with a demo tape I made. And this was actually a cassette back in 2001 of games I called from the stands at Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium. That was the first demo tape that I actually submitted of baseball to anyone, was my calls of Mets and Yankees games. And most of the tape was my call of a Yankees-Red Sox game that I called from the stands. But the first clip on the tape was my call. If you remember, the first baseball game played in New York City after 9/11 was between the Mets and the Braves. And at the time, the Mets were trying to fight in the playoffs and would wind up coming up short that year. It was Mets and the Braves, and the Mets were trailing late, and Mike Piazza hit a go-ahead 2-run home run off for Steve Parsay to put the Mets ahead for good, and he wound up winning that game in the first baseball game in New York after 9/11. Well, my first call on my first demo was my call of that home run hit by Mike Piazza from the stands at Shea Stadium. So I went out to Yakima, Washington. I had never been to the West Coast before. Drove cross country and with a car I had bought a month before, and went out to Yakima, Washington, and they were a Diamondbacks affiliate. And the Diamondbacks had an interesting strategy that year. And I don't know if this was what they planned, but basically their strategy was, we're not going to send any of our high draft picks to Yakima, Washington. Or if they were there very briefly. So needless to say, the Yakima Bears in 2002 were not very good. As a matter of fact, they had a 22-game losing streak, which has only been done by 2 other minor league teams in the last 40 years. Lose 22 in a row. And when you play 22-game losing streak is pretty bad anyway, but especially when you play a 76-game season, that's just a 30-year season right there. But yeah, they did not win a game in the month of August, the 2002 Yakima Bears. But even still, that year in 2002, I was just trying to figure out, if I wanted to do this and if I was any good at it. You had a question, sir?
Well, you said you called it from the stand. You did it up there with the mic?
With the tape recorder and the microphone, yeah.
Not working for anybody. You're
Nope. Yeah.
hanging out calling the game.
Just calling a game. It's just like a normal person would do with a baseball. What's funny that you bring that up? So the Yankees-Red Sox game that I called from the stands in 2001, if it wasn't a sellout, it was pretty close. Pedro Martinez started for the Red Sox, who was actually my all-time favorite pitcher to watch. I saw him pitch at Yankee Stadium when he was with Boston at least 6 or 7 times. I would kind of plan out, look ahead, like a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead to see if he was going to pitch at Yankee Stadium. Because I grew up a Mets fan, actually, in the Bronx, as a Mets fan, believe it or not. So 1986, I had different feelings about it than a lot of people in this room.
Yeah.
So this game was packed. So I'm in the upper deck at Yankee Stadium with my tape recorder. I have my scorebook on one leg. I have some notes on my other leg. And I'm calling the game from the stands. And it's elbow to elbow people. And wound up being a good game. Andy Ramirez hit a home run off of Mariano Rivera in the ninth, tied, and then the Yankees wound up winning it on a Luis Sojo walk-off hit in the bottom of the ninth off of Rod Beck. Those names bring back some memories for baseball fans. But I remember at one point, and I didn't realize this until I listened back to the demo much later, I said something, it was a big moment in the game, and I mentioned, the crowd's really getting loud. And when I listened back to my demo, there was someone in the stand saying, he said we're getting loud, let's get loud. These people inadvertently were actually helping me with my demo. But so I get out to Yakima in 2002, and so I was trying to figure out whether I could do this and whether I wanted to do this. And by the end of the summer, I knew that I did want to do this, and I felt like if I kept working at it, I could be halfway decent at it. But I think it was probably really helpful to me to broadcast a team that wasn't very good my first year, because I think, it's a lot easier to enjoy something or to enjoy broadcasting for a team when everything's going well, when the team's winning and everybody's great and everybody's in a great mood. It's a little harder when the team's not as good. And I mean, we had a really good staff. They were all really good guys. Our manager was Mike Aldretti, who now coaches for Oakland, played in the big leagues. Our pitching coach was Mel Stottlemyre Jr., big league pitching coach with a few teams. I think he's with Miami now. And our hitting coach was Jay Gaynor, who played a little bit in the big leagues and kind of lived in the area. Was an original Colorado Rocky in '93. They were all great guys to me and great to deal with, and that made it a lot easier. But yeah, I mean, having to go through that and still, every day enjoying going to the ballpark despite, because I mean, and Brownie knows this as well. There are years when you're broadcasting for a team and you go to the ballpark thinking, yeah, we probably don't have much of a chance tonight because, the team's not very good, or you got a really good pitcher going against you or whatever. I mean, you never know what can happen, obviously, but there are days when you go to the ballpark and you figure you're probably going to call a loss. And even still with that, I still enjoy every single day of being in Yakima, Washington, and throughout the Pacific Northwest calling minor league baseball. And for a team that wasn't very good, it was still a blast. I still enjoyed every minute of it. It was a great summer. There's still people that I keep in touch with that I met when I was in Yakima. So that's kind of how it all kind of started. So I think that was good preparation that year in Yakima for, 2013 with the Astros, when they lost 111 games and, weren't very good. And it was more about selling the future and selling hope than it was about necessarily talking about, how good the 2013, Astros were, because there were a lot of good guys in that team, just not a lot of good baseball players. Yes.
What would you estimate your listening audience was in Yakima, Washington?
That's a good question. I know. So this was this was when being able to listen to games on the internet was in its infancy, pretty much. And when minor league teams started doing this in 2002. And so a lot of the parents would listen. That's the interesting thing about being in the minors is, I was with 3 different teams in the minor leagues. I was in Yakima for a year, and then I was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, called games for an independent league team in Frontier League for 2 years, and then in Binghamton, New York, calling games for the Mets AA affiliate for 4 years. And so often, and this isn't an exaggeration, so often when parents come to see their sons play, the first person they want to meet in the minors is the radio guy, because that's the one who's been bringing their kids' games to them, this whole time. I'll never forget, I'll get back to Yakima here in a second, but when I was in Binghamton, my first year, 2005, our best pitcher on the team was Brian Bannister, one of pitching in the big leagues, and he's now a pitching coach, and one of my favorite people all time that I've been around in baseball. And Brian's dad was Floyd Bannister, who pitched in the big leagues. Actually was, pitched briefly for the Astros. And I had asked Brian when his parents are going to come to town, because I wanted to meet his dad and I wanted to interview Floyd Bannister. And Brian had told me, and I had forgotten, but I'm about to go on the air in Binghamton, and I get a knock on the door of my radio booth, and I open the door, and there's this guy comes up to me, and he says, "You're Robert Ford, right? Floyd Bannister. Nice to meet you. I love listening to you. Thank you so much." And it was like a whirlwind. I was like, "Oh, hey, are you free tomorrow? Can I talk to you later? And I mean, we wound up being great, but yeah, that happens a lot in the minors. So yeah, a lot of families were listening for sure. There were definitely people in the community who listened in Yakima. But a funny story about that year. So this is 2002. Yakima's about 3 hours from Seattle. And this is when the Mariners were really good and extremely popular in this part of the country. Bless you. And I noticed that there were fans in the stands who would have headsets on and listening to a radio broadcast. And so I thought they were listening to me. And I made mention to one of the season ticket holders, man, it's great that people come to games and listen to me. And the season ticket holder looked at me and was like, they're not listening to you. They're listening to the Mariners. They're listening to J.P. House and Rick Biz. And so that was one of many very humbling moments of my broadcast. But yeah, they were not listening to me in the stands, at least not most of those people. But we were on a AM station that was a classic country station. And now I'm from New York City, where, you know, no one knows anything about country music. I didn't grow up listening to it. There's not even a country music I don't think there hasn't been a country music radio station in New York City probably in 40, 50 years. It just doesn't rate. So I go to Yakima, find out not only are games on a country station, but a classic country station. I had no idea what that was. But the people who worked there were fantastic and great to deal with. But yeah, that was an experience. And then every now and again, because they would pipe the audio and broadcast into the concourse of the ballpark. So after games, sometimes me and the other staff members, we'd be hanging out in the concourse, whatever, having a beer or what have you, or eating some leftover hot dogs or something. And we'd have the radio still on to the classic country station after the game was over. And we'd be sitting there, and we were all, most of the staffers were pretty young, were around my age. I was 23 at the time. And we'd be like, what are we listening to right now? What is this? Did somebody turn that off, please? But needless to say, we were not the classic country audience at the time. Yes.
You ever find yourself in one of those games that's just like it's never going to end?
Yeah.
It's going off into a Harry Doyle.
Never did that. Never drank on the air, not alcohol either. Yeah, you're always going to have a game or two like that in the season, where it just seems like it won't end. Or the worst, actually, are the games where you have a long rain delay beforehand, which is one of the great things about working in Houston with a roof, and working in the AL West, where we do most of the games, where everybody either has a roof now or it doesn't rain if they are outdoors. But yeah, the worst are really the games that drag when you've already had, a rain delay at the start and then maybe a rain delay in the middle of it. Those are the ones that make you maybe consider a different career, or those days. I remember I did a game in Binghamton, New York, and it was early in the season. It was April, and it was very cold. It was probably 40 degrees. And I had lost my voice, which, is something that happens from time to time. And I was working solo in Binghamton, and the game went 15 innings. And I remember this is not someone who went to the big leagues. We had this outfielder, Binghamton, Jorge Padilla. He hit a walk-off home run in the bottom of the fifth. And I was so excited, not only because the game had ended, but I could finally stop talking. So I called the home run, and I try to, you try to raise your voice an octave, and my voice cracked because that's how badly hoarse I was at the time. And it was freezing in Binghamton. But yeah, you do have games like that from time to time. I remember one year also in Binghamton, we had a game in Trenton, New Jersey, where we had a long rain delay, and it was on my birthday too. Had a long rain delay, and then the game on going 15 innings. And then we had to get on a bus and go to New Britain, Connecticut after the game. So we didn't get into New Britain, Connecticut until about 9 in the morning after that game. But, for the longest time, I never did a game longer than 15 innings. And the reason I know that is because the scorebook that I use goes to 15 innings. And that changed in 2016. I believe, it was 2016. Astros hosted Cleveland. and they played a game that went 16 innings, and Marwin Gonzalez won it on a walk-off homer. That was the first time I actually had to flip to a new page of my scorebook to put in a 16th inning on the page. Unfortunately, the game didn't last much longer than that. So I still hate the ghost run, by the way, just in case you're wondering. But fortunately, there aren't too many games like that over the course of the season. But yeah, you'll have a few where, they're just dragging, or it's really hot. It's like no one can throw a strike. And yeah, those, I remember telling AJ Hinch once when he was managing here, because he said to me something like, we were talking about some game or something, and he was like, yeah, he was like, that was dragging or something like that. I was like, yeah, I said, I really felt it upstairs. He's like, you can feel that? I said, I'm like, AJ, if you think the game is dragging, I think the game is dragging. I said, I'm not, maybe in the elements quite the way you are, but yeah, I'm like, if you feel it, we feel it too. Maybe not in the same way, because we don't get paid for winning or losing, but we definitely feel it. So yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you still have your cassette decks tapes?
The demos?
Yes.
I think I still have a couple of my original demo, and I even printed out labels to put on the tape of like my name and address, phone number for teams to contact me. But yeah, I still have. Remember, I made 50 of them, and I think I gave out like 5. Had my dual cassette tape deck that I could record, and I spent like all day one day doing that right before the winter meetings. CDs are much better, as are emailing links to people of audio. So yes.
So what's the key to your relationship with Sparks? I mean, it's not like in the minors where you're working a lot of games by yourself, and now you've got a partner that you never work with. What's the key to getting that successful?
That's a good question. And it was an adjustment for me learning how to work with a partner, because I have had interns that I've worked with, but that's a lot different than working with a former major league ball player. Who's just going to have, more knowledge and expertise than your average intern in the minor leagues that you're doing games with. And I think what makes it work with Steve and I think there are a couple of things. First of all, we're both big baseball fans. And, you'd be surprised. There are quite a few players who, they may love playing baseball, but they're not necessarily baseball fans. Like Steve Sparks had never played at all, had never thrown a pitch in the minors or the majors. Steve Sparks would still be the biggest baseball fan, for sure. Because, he grew up, you're talking about the transistor radio, he grew up with that, and, listening to games, and, absolutely was, collected baseball cards as a kid. So first of all, we're both big baseball fans. I think another part of it is neither one of us have massive egos. So, we don't care who shines or who gets credit or who does what. That's not a big deal to either of us. So I think that's important. And I think the other thing is we both take what we do very seriously and take our preparation very seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. And that goes back to not having, huge egos as well. And I think that's, I think those are probably the biggest reasons why, that partnership works. And, we enjoy being around each other. And we, at this point, we've been together 9 years. We can play off of each other. So that just makes it that much more enjoyable. But yeah, I think those are the 3 biggest things. Yes.
Kind of follow up on that. Obviously, both you and Steve a lot. Steve does play-by-play, and you're. I don't know, is that part of his contract or?
So it's not explicitly part of Steve's contract. So those of you, and I'm sure most of you in this room remember when, Milo Hamilton was calling games on the radio, and most of his broadcast partners were former players, whether it was, Larry Dierker or Alan Ashby. And they would always do, whoever the former player in the booth with Milo would always do 2 innings of play-by-play. Always do, I believe it was the 4th inning and the 7th inning. And so when I got hired, I had no idea, and neither did Steve for that matter. We had no idea what the division of labor was going to be. We had no idea, was I going to do all the play-by-play? Was Steve going to do some play-by-play? And I remember telling Steve at the beginning of our first spring training, I asked him, do you want to do play-by-play? I was like, have they told you you're doing any play-by-play? He was like, It's like, they haven't told me anything. He's like, I'll do it if they ask me to. And I just told him, I said, hey, just know I will never stand in the way of you doing play-by-play. I said, I want to do the majority of the innings of play-by-play, but I will never stand in the way of you doing play-by-play if this is something you want to do. And Milo actually came down. That was actually the last spring training that Milo came to in 2013 in Kissimmee. And he filled in for me for a couple of games and filled in for Sparks for a couple of games. And the couple of games, the couple of games he did with Sparks, he had him do play-by-play for the first time. And so that's kind of how that got the ball rolling with Steve doing play-by-play. After a few years, when Reed Ryan was team president, he said, well, how about Steve do a third inning of play-by? So then it became third, fourth, and seventh. And I mean, I like it because I think it's helpful for us to switch roles because it gives us a little bit of a different perspective. I think it gives the audience a little bit of a different perspective. If it was one of those things where they asked me to do all 9, I would, but I definitely prefer this. And I think it also kind of gives me a little bit of a break, a little bit of a breather, which I really realized when Steve got COVID and wound up missing an entire West Coast road trip. And I had to do most of those, or pretty much all those games by myself. I really appreciated Steve after that, as if I didn't already. But yeah, I think it's a good change of pace. And I think Steve he's developed into a really good play-by-play broadcaster as well. Yes.
Your voice is your most precious asset. How do you take that during the season and the off season? But it pretty much exhausted. Season comes to.
Well, I do a lot of yelling. No, actually not at all. That's like the worst thing. It's funny. I get that question a lot. I don't necessarily do anything special, and I think that's probably true for most broadcasters. I think more of it is just not doing anything ridiculous, like don't frequent loud clubs where you have to yell to talk to the person next to you, for instance. That was never my scene anyway, so I guess it's the right job for me. Not overexerting yourself, your voice when you don't have to, not yelling, and also too on the air. That's another big part of it too, because I think a lot of young broadcasters who are just starting out, and I certainly did this, when they get excited, they yell. And that's not what you want to do, and that generally doesn't sound as good. What you want to do more is just kind of raise your voice, like come up a few octaves, and that takes time to kind of learn as a broadcaster. Because I remember the first few times I ever did play-by-play when I was in college, after the games were over, I'd feel hoarse. But that means when that happens, that means you're not using your voice correctly. And so over time, I learned that. I probably should drink tea more often. I do drink tea. Chamomile is the best tea for your voice, but especially if you ever have like your horse or whatever, some chamomile with some honey, that works better than anything else as far as tea goes. So, fun fact. Yes.
Do you sing for voice control?
You don't want me to sing. Nobody does. No, I don't sing. I know there's some broadcasters who do like vocal exercises and stuff like that. I've never really done anything specific like that, but I think it definitely can help. Yes.
So I go back to the Gene Elston days here, and he was the guy that I listened to in my bedroom. My mom would come in and say, "You were asleep, I wouldn't answer this." But so I kind of grew up with him, and ever heard any of his calls. He's very cool, calm, collected, and the opposite of a homer. We've had a few homers, in the Astros broadcast history, in my opinion. Yeah, you come across to me as someone that's very Gene Elston-like. Not that you like him, but your approach to it, which I really, really like, and I was really picky about guys that can play by play. I really am. I really like what you do and the way you do it. But my question is that background. Did you have any sort of guidance given you or any training that talked about the homer factor, if you will, and how much to do and how much not to do?
That's a good question. I don't know if there was necessarily any formal training. So for me, I grew up in New York City. I was a huge Mets fan. Darryl Strawberry is still my all-time favorite player. He had a walk-off home run first Mets game I ever went to. in April of 1985 off the Reds John Franco, by the way. And I've actually found the video of that on YouTube. So when I really started to get into following baseball every day, because I grew up a Mets fan, I'm from a family of Mets fans. And it wasn't until the late 80s when I really started to really like make an effort to follow baseball on a regular basis and follow the Mets every day. And back in those days, in the late 80s into the 90s, the Mets had 75 games on WWR Channel 9 over the air, and they had 75 games on what was then Sports Channel on cable. And my mom did not get cable. My parents were divorced. I'd be at my dad's on weekends. He had cable, but the Mets usually were on Channel 9 weekends. But so during the week, I listened to a lot of the Mets games on the radio. And the Mets broadcasters when I was growing up were Bob Murphy and Gary Cohen. And Bob Murphy called Mets games from day one in 1962. And Gary Cohen was like the young guy in the booth. When I started listening to the Mets on the radio, Gary was maybe a year or two out of the minor leagues. And now he does the Mets television broadcast on their cable network on SNY and does a really great job. But I grew up listening to those two guys. And neither of them are homers, classified as homers. They certainly wanted the Mets to win. They certainly get more excited when the Mets do something well, as opposed to when another team does something against the Mets. But they also were very prepared, especially Gary, in terms of like knowledge of the other teams and the other players and background and information like that. And I get a lot of that from having listened to Gary Cohen all those years. And after Bob Murphy retired, Gary Cohen became a lead radio play-by-play guy. And he's probably the one, he's definitely the biggest baseball broadcasting influence for me. So I don't know if there was anything I necessarily learned. I think it just came more from, that's what, go ahead. I want to stop anybody from getting their money. That I think that's, it was like just kind of through osmosis, because I think you grow up, when you become a broadcaster, I think, at least especially starting out, you try to sound like the people you grew up listening to. And then hopefully you eventually develop your own style. But I think that's where that really comes from. And I honestly think early in my minor league career, I tried too hard to be kind of neutral and to not be too much of a home. And it took time for me to kind of learn, yeah, it's okay to be more excited when your team does something well, and you can still be excited when the other team makes a great play or, what have you. But yeah, I think it was more just kind of learning just from listening and, what my influences were growing up.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is it about Syracuse that so many big time announcers came from Syracuse?
Because it's really cold and snowy, and so you have nothing better to do but to stay inside and work on your school. That's not it. We still find ways to get out. So depending on whatever study or you look at, Syracuse is one of the top party schools in the Northeast. I think at Syracuse, I didn't realize I wanted to do play-by-play until I got to Syracuse. I initially thought, well, maybe I want to be a sports anchor, a sports reporter, or what have you. And my dad was actually the one that he had planted the seed even before I ever knew I wanted to do this. I remember him mentioning to me when I was a kid about how, Bob Costas went to Syracuse, and that's where a lot of the sports broadcasters go. That's a school where a lot of them come out of. I don't know how my dad knew this. My dad, I'd be proud to tell you, he was a junior college dropout, but he was very well aware of Syracuse's reputation. So that seed was kind of planted early, even before I knew I wanted to do this. So, when I started looking at colleges and realized I wanted to study broadcast journalism, Syracuse, and also too, I didn't want to go super far from home. I wanted to go away, but I didn't want to go too far away. Syracuse is about 4 or 5 hours from New York City. So that was perfect. A lot of people think it's a suburb of New York City, but it's not. It's very different, which I learned when I got there. I thought it was a suburb too, honestly, because I had never been there before. I started looking at schools, but I think first of all, it's a really good program. You get a lot of hands-on experience. There are 3 radio stations on campus. The best known one is WAR, which is a student station, the NPR station on campus, and they also play jazz, and they also have student broadcast of all the Syracuse men's basketball, football, and men's lacrosse games. Lacrosse is huge in Syracuse, by the way. And I actually never worked for WAR, but there were still other stations there that I did work for, and I worked for commercial radio stations in town as well. So there are a lot of opportunities to get on the air there, whether it's on campus or in the community. I think another thing that's great because, and this isn't just with broadcasting, but a lot of schools, when you're applying to schools, they'll tell you about, all the great alums that have come from this program or from your university. And then you go and you hear about them, but you never see them. But one of the great things about going to Syracuse is all the famous alums, they all come back. I got to meet Marv Albert. He came and spoke when I was there. Mike Tirico spoke several times. Dick Stockton was doing NBA games on Turner at the time. He came and spoke, another Syracuse alum. Andy Musser was Phillies radio broadcaster. He came and spoke. This is the first time I ever saw a World Series ring, actually. It was Andy Musser's 1980 Phillies championship ring. And now the one I have is bigger. Yeah. But yeah, Bob Costas, he came and spoke when I was a student there. So it's not just that, well, hey, Syracuse has produced all of these great alums. And it's not just in sports broadcasting, it's in broadcasting in general. But like they come back and speak. And actually, I'm actually going to be in Syracuse the last weekend of the month. So I guess not this weekend, but the following weekend. Because I try to go up every few years to go to a basketball game. And they've renovated the Carrier Dome and I want to see it, even though Syracuse basketball is not worth watching this year. And whenever I go up, I always reach out to, actually, it's one of my former classmates who kind of runs their sports media center at Syracuse. And, I say, hey, I'm going to be in town. And if you want me to speak to students, I'll speak to students. And when I tell them that, all of a sudden I get great seats to the basketball game. So, it works out for everyone. So I'm going to have really good seats to that Syracuse basketball game too, and I'll speak to students while I'm up there. And I've done that a couple of times, talk to students. And it's kind of surreal, actually. Like the first time I did it, it's like, wait, I was always in these rooms. I remember being a student sitting in these rooms listening to, Sean McDonough or whomever, and actually be the one students were listening to was actually pretty cool and a lot of fun. So, and I think it's important too to like pay it forward. And that's the cool thing about meeting those broadcasters is that they all kind of felt that way too, which is why they were talking to us. I have friends who got jobs because, they got to meet Bob Costas when he was on campus or Mike Tirico. I mean, that makes a difference. Yes.
I've heard Yankee radio. You do not sound like a person from the Bronx like they did.
Well, Susan Waldman is from Boston.
Well, they definitely have a regional, whether they have a regional accent. You don't have a regional accent.
It comes out in certain word. It comes out more when I'm in New York and ordering pizza. And
do you work on purposely or just?
What's funny? So both of my parents were also born and raised in New York City. And my mom doesn't have much of an accent, and she's lived in New York City her entire life. My dad had more of an accent, not like, D's and do's, but it was certainly there. But yeah, it's just was never something that was particularly strong. But yeah, I have been told when I talk to my mom on the phone, my accent comes out more. And I definitely feel it like if I'm like I said, if I'm like ordering pizza or I'm at a bar or something and the bartender or whomever, or the server is from New York and has an accent, I find myself kind of falling back into it a little bit, if you will. But if the bartender or whomever I can clearly tell is not from New York, then I don't do it. It's kind of funny, but I've never really had a strong accent, and I couldn't tell you why. That's just the way it's kind of worked out.
Probably wouldn't have got this job if you sound like you're from Bronx.
Well, Eric Nadel, who's Hall of Fame broadcaster with the Rangers. If you've ever listened to Eric Nadel on the radio, he sounds like he just came from Brooklyn, which is where he's from, and he's great. And he's one of my good friends in the business. But yeah, he still very much has a very strong Brooklyn accent. Yeah. Yes.
When you have such a recognizable slogan call, is that something you consciously figure out? Well, I have to have something that I can identify with.
So
Identifies me. I mean, do you work on that?
I tried to in the minors, and it doesn't work out well when you do it that way. When it's contrived, you know. And I've had people ask me, like, you know, the "see you later," like, where did that come from? And I honestly can't tell you, like, when it started or that it was a conscious thing. It was just something I would say on home runs, and I like the way it sounded, so I'd say it more often when the Astros hit a home run. And those who listen, you know, somewhat regularly know that I don't always say "see you later" on every home run. It just kind of just depends on the home run and just kind of what kind of just comes to mind. And I've always been, some broadcasters try to script things out more. And I've always been someone who feels like I sound best when it's spontaneous and when it's extemporaneous, and I'm not trying to write anything down. And I also hate reading from a script. I absolutely hate it. So like, even if I like, you know, like if I'm, you know, giving a speech and I have notes, it'll just be like bullet points. It will never be like completely written out, because that's just not the way my brain works. But yeah, it's something that, yeah, when I first started in the minor leagues, I thought, yeah, you know, you need to have the signature home run call, and I would try out different things, and they were terrible because it was forced. But yeah, this just kind of developed, and I don't know that I said "see you later" when I was in the minors. I honestly can't remember, but I don't think I did. But it was something I said a few times and thought it sounded pretty good, and it's like, well, let me keep doing that. So, and I think that's honestly how a lot of the best calls develop. Yes.
Yeah. So you said you don't like to use a script. And I'm thinking of two calls in particular. Taking away the 2017 World Series champs call.
Mm-hmm.
How did you sort of troll yourself when Altuve hit the home run off of Chapman in 2019? Was that something?
Well, you could argue that I didn't control myself.
Right there. So sounded like you had to be overwhelmed or something.
In 19 at the ALCS. I mean, you know, and that's kind of the cool thing too. And I think that's also the reason why, especially when you talk about postseason, you don't want to script anything. I remember something that Pat Hughes, the longtime Cubs radio broadcaster, said in 2016 when the Cubs went to the World Series, and people were asking him, yeah, the Cubs haven't won since 1908. What are you going to say when the Cubs win? What's going to be your call? Pat's answer was, I don't know. It's like, it depends on what happens. Maybe it's a walk-off home run. Maybe it's an exciting play at the plate. Maybe it's just a whole hum fly ball to right field, and you know, the final score is 10-2. It's like you can't plan something when you don't even know how the game is going to go. So my call for the end of the 2019 ALCS was a lot different than my call for the end of the 2021 ALCS, which was just a harmless fly ball. You know, it was caught, and you know, and I mean, the game wasn't really in doubt at that point, and that was it. Whereas, you know, with Altuve with the home run, you know, it was, and I mean, that was, as I'm sure most people in this room remember, I mean, you know, the Astros had the lead going into the ninth inning. DJ LeMahieu hits the home run to tie it. So that was kind of deflating. It looked like, okay, they were going to go to the World Series, and now not quite when we thought. And then you get to the bottom of the ninth, and I remember Chapman, you know, the first two hitters, I mean, he just was dominant and, you know, got two quick outs. And then George Springer came up, and all of a sudden couldn't throw a strike with his fastball. And Springer realized that and drew a walk. And so, you know, and I remember thinking, you know, when Altuve came up and Chapman was still spraying his fastball, still couldn't throw it for a strike. I remember thinking, because if I remember correctly, it got to 3-2 or 3-1. And so, but I think Steve and I even talked about it on the air. Like, Altuve has to be sitting slider here. There's no reason to look for anything else, because he can't throw anything else for a strike, and you're ahead in the count. So if he throws a fastball for a strike, just tip your hat. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, did I know he was going to hit a home run there? No. So you can't plan that. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of let the emotion just kind of take over. And I think it's important to do that, and also still, and this goes back to not yelling when you're on the air, let the emotion kind of take over. Whatever that emotion is, and you still want to be clear enough so that people understand what's going on. Because you know, there's nothing worse. I remember years ago listening to a high school football game, and when I was in Michigan, and it was a tie game, and time was, it was like, second or two left on the clock. And the kicker was lining up for a field goal. And the broadcaster's like, the kick is up, and he missed, or it's good. Like that. And they just started screaming. It was like, wait, and it took maybe a minute before they actually said the kick was good. And it's like, well, this would have been information useful sooner. Because I almost ran my car off the road for this high school game I don't care about, because I'm like, what happened? So I think it's important to be, to have that excitement, but also, hey, what's the final score? What's the result? All of that. Because that's all still important, especially on radio when people can't see what happened. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So I remember a game this past season, and you read a comment from somebody sent an email to you and said, hey, I listened to you, but every now and then, could you tell us more about the matchup? Like, is it a left-handed pitcher versus a right-handed batter?
Right.
And you said that, you thanked the person that wrote in. So do you have any kind of a mechanism?
No.
I think other broadcasters were required to mention your station or something. They'd have a, RS.
Red Barber, the great Dodgers Yankees broadcaster back in the day, used to have an egg timer. And, if the sand ran out, it'd remind him to mention the score again, and he'd flip it over. I've never done anything like that. I just try to remember, for lack of a better word. But yeah, to that point, I think it's important, especially again on radio, to make sure you mention from time to time it's a lefty on the mound, it's a right-handed batter, it's a left-handed batter, what have you. Whether it's Astros players or, most of our listeners are going to know, obviously, that Altuve bats right-handed and that Brantley bats left-handed, things like that. But I think it does help to just kind of, because it just paints the picture when you hear that. So I think it still helps to have those details, which I think sometimes may seem inconsequential or of course, what's the big deal? And, nowadays, if they want to know where he bats, they can just look it up on the internet. But I think that still helps to paint the picture. It's still important to have it. So, yes.
Will you be traveling with the club this year?
That's the plan as far as I know. We started traveling after the All-Star break last year. And just radio did. Television, no television crew traveled in the big leagues at all last year. Not a single one, none of the 30 teams. There was even ridiculous stuff last year. The Mets and Yankees played a series at Yankee Stadium, and the Mets TV crew was doing the game from Citi Field that was being played at Yankee Stadium, which, I don't know how familiar you are with the geography of New York, but really, that's just 2 subway lines. You just take the 7 and then take the 4, and you're right there at Yankee Stadium. It's not that far, and not that hard to get to. It was really bizarre the way that kind of went down. And it seemed like last year, no team wanted to be the first to travel their TV. But I think if one team had started, a bunch of teams were ready to be second. It was that sort of thing because, it was this whole thing about saving money, and there's some debate as to how much money they really saved. And then on the radio side, we were more fortunate, but not every team traveled radio. It was, if I remember correctly, it was 11 teams that traveled radio. So only about a third of the big league teams traveled their radio during the season. In the postseason, everybody traveled. Well, that's not true. Not everybody traveled. The Dodgers did not. And if the Dodgers, because remember, there's the Dodgers Braves in the NLCS. If the Dodgers had won the NLCS, they still weren't sure if they were going to travel for the World Series for radio, which is incomprehensible to me that you wouldn't, at that point, the biggest games you're playing in your franchise, why you wouldn't travel for that. And the Braves radio, they did travel for the World Series, and they had been traveling in the latter part of the regular season. But yeah, the plan is, as far as I know, I haven't been told any different. The plan is for us to still travel. I'm assuming TV will travel as well, although I can't say that I know that for certain, but I think that was kind of the expectation at the end of the year. Obviously, with what's going on with the pandemic, that can always change things, but the plan is for us to travel again. And boy, I hope that's the case, because doing games off television monitors did wonders for my sanity or insanity, as it were. So, any other questions?
Yeah, David Jerome? Oh, online, David? David is there with Shirley Burton, by the way.
Oh.
David, you were waving. Did you have a question for Robert?
No, I wasn't waiting. I didn't think I was waiting. But no,
Okay.
no. Sure.
I can't hear you. You have a question?
I did not have a question, no. I apologize if, yeah. Shirley's sitting here on camera. I'm off to the side.
Oh, okay. You were waving. I thought you had a question. It's all right, David. It's good to hear your voice. Anybody else? Well, Robert, I'm looking forward to this. So am I. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Mike, did you want to have huh? Very quick, yeah, very quickly. Then
Are you make sure
yes, Mike McCraw is going to talk about vintage baseball real fast.
Yeah, real quick. The committee got together, our executive committee, and we came up with an idea about how we could publicize SABR to get more members. So we decided maybe we would do a SABR exhibition. Haven't gotten that far on it, but I've talked with Bob Blair, who's taken over the managementship of the Houston Babies. And I talked with Bob Cotsis, who does the Boston, Bob Copas, who does the Cypress Red Sox, Barker's Cypress, and Tom Flores with the Katy Combine. They're all interested. I talked to Tom today. He's up to about 4 players. We all have uniforms, and so we're looking to get like a park at reserve a field at Memorial Park in the next couple of months, and maybe the Katy Field. They have one really good field out there in Katy where we played games before, and get the 3 teams and maybe play a round robin of like 6-inning games. Bill Brown has volunteered to help us with publicity and take photos. We have new uniforms. I'm glad for that. When we did the SABR convention, we had a silent auction. We had brand new uniforms. Our older uniforms, I used to play, and my daughter Megan would run for them. We played out in Sealy, and it was a family day. So between games, she and I went and played egg toss. And she threw me a line drive that broke all over my shirt. When I got home, I put it in the pile for laundry. And my dog, our golden retriever, smelled the egg and ate my jersey. So I was really happy to get a new uniform after that. And the old one was kind of ragged. And and I've joined the National Vintage Baseball League on behalf of the Houston Babies. They have a World Series up there every year. I didn't know that, but Bob Blair has a dream to go play it, and it's in Michigan. And so hopefully we can get, and he's been involved in amateur baseball, softball in Houston for a long time. And there's a guy, Joe Bogovich, I think's his last name, but he has over 600 amateur players. He's in charge of all the leagues. And Bob's talked to him about contacting all these people. So if we can get the games scheduled in the field, then if we don't have enough players, and we can get some of those guys out, we'll have more players that can play. For those of y'all that are not used to wear vintage baseball, we play 1860 rules. It's kind of like a hardball version of slow pitch, but they're different rules. Wherever the ball hits, it's fair, no matter where it lines up. Catch it on one bounce, you're out. If you catch a line drive, you get to go back to the base free, but that's different rules. But anyway, it's a lot of fun, and the Houston Babies was the Houston's first team in the Texas League. And they also won the first game in the Texas League against Galveston, where we recreated that game 5 or 6 years ago. So the other reason I'm here today, but I should have it all worked out by the next meeting. So hopefully we'll get to do that. And I'll talk to you, Bill, about your ideas. So my daughter, who also played for the Houston Babies and the youngest woman to score a run at the Skeeters Fields. Part of the rules is you can have a pinch runner, and I couldn't run, so I would go hit. My daughter Megan would run.
Sure, let Megan get.
But hey, with her running, we never had an out. So, but anyway, she is engaged to a fine young man, Nick Thornquist, who played baseball at UTSA. Nick got his degree in mechanical engineer. He was a all-state catcher twice at Dallas Flower Mound, and he went to UTSA on a baseball scholarship for the sole purpose of getting his engineering degree. But a funny thing happened in this past year. He got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID, and he had more hours to complete because of the baseball schedules. He did graduate with an A average. But he had a really good year. He was named the top college catcher in the state of Texas. Wow. He was one of the 17 semifinalists for the Buster Posey Award as the top catcher in the nation. And all of a sudden he became a draft prospect. He went on vacation with my wife and Megan and me in June. And he had a lot of scouts calling him from different teams. He was getting kind of frustrated. So I asked him if he'd like me to call Tal Smith. And I did. And Tal was gracious enough to counsel him and give him some good advice that helped him settle down a little bit. He didn't like to admit he was a little riled up. But anyway, he went through the draft. He didn't get drafted. But 30 minutes later, the Chicago White Sox called him and made him a better offer than he would have gotten had he got drafted in the bottom part of the lineup. So he went to spring training. He got a bonus. He invested his money fairly well. Look at my daughter's left hand. Spent some of the money well, but so he went to Birmingham for a few weeks, and then he went to rookie ball in Arizona for about 6 weeks. Mr. Dorrill said, well, that's something none of us have ever done. So would Nick mind coming here and speaking about how it was to all of a sudden become a professional, graduate from college in June and being a professional ball player in August. So without further ado, Mr. Nick, you're on. And I wore the White Sox jersey so y'all could boo me. I'm used to it.
Mike, you forgot to say that Nick played for the Babies already this year.
I did.
That's right.
I didn't do very well. I was missing a lot. But yeah, so I grew up in Dallas, played high school ball there, and kind of grew up on the, everybody's saying a little short to be a catcher, small to be a catcher. I'm like, okay. Fine, I'm used to it. Used to doing all that stuff. And then senior year in high school, I only got 2 offers to play college baseball. It was at junior college. One was in Waco, and one was at Hill, not far from there. So when I got to play at Glenn Community College, didn't play my first year. I was 3rd string on that team. Yeah, I think it was 30 at bats because we'd be winning by enough to where they put me in. From there, my next year got to be the 2nd string on the team, and UTSA gave me a call, said, hey, willing to give me a chance. I'd love to keep playing. I want to get my degree in engineering, and went and played at UTSA, still thinking, hey, might not be the starter, but just keep trying to play, keep playing. Come to find out, had a good year in my first year at UTSA, then COVID struck the next year, and it was funny going into the last year. I'm like, talked to Megan, my family, some of my really good friends. I'm like, I think I'm ready to hang it up. When I'm done, I think it's my time. They're like, just give it 1 more year, play it out. You got to go to school anyway. It's like, all right, I'll give it the fall. If I think it's time to be done, call it quits. And had a good fall, went into the spring year. Ended up having probably my best year in baseball ever. And I just started flowing through, and it's draft day. Nothing happens, don't get picked. I'm like, well, hugging my parents, like, hey, it was fun. I loved it. People thought I was good finally. You know, as I grew up, everybody's like, he's good, not great, not good enough. So hugging my parents, and then one of the scouts calls and says, hey, I want you to come play with us. I'm like, you know what? I love it. Let's do it. So they sent me to Birmingham, Alabama, with the other 23 people picked, 20 in the draft, and 3 other free agents with me. So we went up there, and it's kind of funny. You get the first rounder comes in about a week later after us, and a nice little like town car. They drive him up. I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. It's just an 18-year-old, 2-year-old nervous to meet him. Like, but he's great guys, all amazing people, all the guys from the draft, and worked out there for 2 weeks. At that time, I hadn't got my COVID shot yet, so I got my vaccine. So then right before I flew out to Arizona. So right when I get to Arizona, start working out there, and it's at the spring training site, which we share with the Dodgers. So in rookie ball, we get to use the major league area, like field, all the stuff. So like we get their locker room. It's pretty sweet. You're like, oh, all right. You walk in, you got your jersey set up, everything's nice and pretty for you. You get up there, and come to find out 2 days later I get COVID. I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. So they stick me up in a hotel for 10 days. And the way they kind of do is you have to get activated to play, because they don't want you to get hurt. They want you to be in the best shape you can before you get on the field. And the next day I was supposed to get activated, get COVID. So I'm like, oh, great. Sit up in a hotel for 10 days, watch all the new draft guys playing. So I'm like following them on my phone, and finally get back. And I had to kind of go through the activation stage again. So it worked me out for about a week and a half. And then after that week and a half, finally got to get in. But rookie ball, we had 30 of the Americans there, and then 30 from the Dominican draft as well. So you got 60 plus people just in one locker room all fighting for 9 spots on the field. So you're like, all right, kind of just try to get in as much as you can. So I got in the 3 weeks to a month that I was activated. I only got 10 at bats, but it was fine. I got in 6 different games, got 10 at bats, but it's kind of promising because I know what they're doing. They want to get the high school kids, the other guys in there, if they're at bats and rookie ball. But from there, it's kind of like, all right, well, get your feet wet, face some of these new arms, some of these guys that are all throwing 95 plus now. It's just how the game's evolved, and you gotta evolve with it, change with it. I know they want you to hit home runs. That's what they want you to do now. It's like, all right, I know a 5'8" guy like me is probably not supposed to be hitting home runs, but you gotta find a way to do it. So, but yeah, that was my first short season. So as of now, we're supposed to head back probably mid-February, start our spring training, which I've heard for me as a catcher is 5 hours bullpens, and then you might get at bat here and there. And I'm like, all right, well, let's get ready for it. But either way, no, I'm super grateful for Mr. McCraw back there. He's sat my back all along this whole journey that he's been a part of with me at UTSA, and obviously his daughter, who my fiance now, she has been nothing but amazing to me, supportive, and yeah, thank you for letting me come speak to y'all. It's good to meet everybody that I have thus far, and hopefully I'll be back at a Babies game here soon. Thank y'all very much. Yeah.
Calling Mr. McCraw.
Will do.
Well, we lost a Babies player. We're always looking for Houston Babies players, play vintage baseball. And believe me, if I can get out there and slide into home plate without actually going around the bases, that any of y'all can play vintage baseball. So I was safe, and Mike called it too. But if you haven't got a copy of Houston Astros Golden Era, I highly recommend everybody get a copy of this book. It's for a good cause. It's for the Houston Food Bank, right? Yeah. We have any questions for Nick? I'm sorry. I'm just rambling on. I'm sorry.
Are you designated for golf club the next year? Ready? What was this?
Yeah, so when I've talked to them, they talked about Indianapolis. That's a lot of another few that they'll put there. Which is high. So it's going to be one of those two that we'll send to. Wow.
The White Sox farm system struggled last year, so it's a good opportunity to have that.
I think they might have been in that group of 22 straight losses.
Anybody else got a question for Nick? Thanks, Mike.
Look,
Mike's watching out.
yeah.
Anyway, so if you haven't had a copy, if you don't have a copy of this, 3 great writers here. You got Bill Brown, Mr. Astros historian himself, Mike Acosta, and I haven't met Phil yet. So all 3 of them are going to talk about the book for a few minutes, and they'll even autograph it for you if you don't have a copy of it. So without further ado, Bill, Mike.
You guys heard from me already, so I'm going to be very brief. I'm not even going to talk about the book, but I will talk about the fact of writing a book. If you are interested in becoming a self-author, self-publisher, might be curious about that process. So why do you go to Amazon versus a publisher, an old-fashioned publisher, we might say? Well, because you're probably not going to get published. That's why you go to Amazon. But there are some advantages to it. And Mike and I worked with the Bright Sky Press here, which is not in business anymore. They did a fine job on an Astros history book we did, which was 8-9 years ago. Coffee table, great photos of the team's history. That was fun. And I had to talk Jim Crane into spending $70,000. And this is the difference between being a self-published book. So on Amazon, how much did we have to put down to do this book? 0. Preferable for most of us. And certainly for me, and of course it wasn't the expensive type book that Bright Sky Press did, but you know, it's a pretty basic book, as you've seen. There are limitations to, you know, color would cost too much to do, color photos in the book. So that's out. But if you want to do a relatively inexpensive book and take it upon yourself, and this would be in terms of marketing the book, writing the book, editing the book, and some of those services, of course, would be a part of working with a publisher. Publisher would give you an editor probably as a part of your upfront fee, would also give you some help marketing or do the marketing and maybe set up some appearances to promote the book, things of that nature. So all that is on you if you do your own book. But if you are the type of person who's considering doing a book, has something to say, wants to be published and is willing to put in the work on it, it's all your decision. And you just get a free account with Amazon. Doing the book is not all that difficult. Writing it, of course, is something. Editing it is something. And then just going through the final checks before you decide to put it up for sale, that's your final process. So that final weekend, and Tal really helped me more than anybody, and Phil helped me too. I went in, I was getting into the panic stage because there were way too many mistakes in this book. So that's what they helped me with, finding mistakes. And it went into this build back better phase. You know, you better make some serious changes here or this thing is not fly. And so that occurred over about 3 days, and then we put it out. And, you know, I'm glad we did it. What I would like for Mike to talk about briefly is how do you package history? Because not as many people are interested in history anymore. We know that this organization is primarily, but a lot of people aren't. And then Phil wrote a lot of the book, good, best and worst trades, things like Andres Reiner developing the Venezuelan market. He contributed a lot of those sections of the book. So Mike, how about you?
Thanks, Brownie. I want to say thanks to Brownie for having Phil and I as part of this project, because as you guys know, history, Astros history, baseball history is something that we love and very well versed in and can kind of speak the language. And so it was a lot of fun to be part of another book project with Brownie. But like you said, how do you package history, you know, for people to really get engaged with it? And I've put together different exhibits at Minute Maid Park and different projects, different locations, and kind of done some stuff online. And I've been engaged with some other baseball fans online and kind of talked to them. And baseball it's very visual. People love seeing historical photos. They like seeing artifacts. They like being able to be right there and see something that was part of history. And so how do we integrate that into the book to kind of further along the text? And so there's a process, right? When you get rights to photos, you have to go through the team, and sometimes there's some challenges with that. So we had to get a little creative. And I've been a memorabilia collector since I was probably 10 years old. When I used to go to the sports shows over at the Astrodome, we used to go to the Dome Skeller, and I used to take $5 or $10 with me and try to get what I want. And that built up to now where I own a lot of older vintage Astros jerseys and all sorts of other things that used to be in the Astrodome. And I've built it up for, better part of 30 something years. And so I told Bill, I said, why don't we take photos of these artifacts that are coming out of private collection? We can put that into the book, and that can tie back to some of these great moments that are these stories that are being told in there. And so he thought that was a really good idea. And I said, then we can also promote it on social media, like on Twitter. We create some slides and put those images there, so that way people know that they're seeing the real deal. They're not just kind of looking at, everybody can see a player photo, but I had acquired this past year, the state auction had come up for Judge Roy Hoffines. I had actually bought a lot of stuff. And so in it were private photos, some other things that didn't belong to the team. So we just used them. I told Bill, I said, let's just put this to use. I said, I bought it to protect it and to get it into my collection. But now, this is kind of what I always envisioned it for, where we could actually take pictures of it and use it to showcase to people. So we did that, and I think it turned out really well. And the response has been good, and it's for a good cause. And again, it just have to, people, I think a lot of people in here also like reading text and reading stories, but there's a lot of people who really are visual. They like to see the colors, and the Astros have had a very colorful history, from the uniforms to the green AstroTurf and all of that. So seeing that, and one of the things that I find it's kind of cool in a way, we had these rainbow jerseys in the books. Back when they were going to the rainbow jerseys, someone mentioned that if you saw the Astros on TV, and of course this was the emergence of color television in the 70s, but there was still a lot of black and white broadcasts. They said it didn't matter if you were going to watch the Astros in black and white, because you would see those rainbow stripes and those shades of gray, and you would still know it was the Astros. So that still shines through in this book. So to me, that was the most engaging part, I think, of the book. And of course, Bill, you want to come up and talk? And again, I just want to say thanks to Brownie for asking me to be part of this project. And anytime, it's always great working. Thank you.
I also appreciate Brownie inviting me to come do this. This all kind of came up at pretty much at the last minute. But I have just thrust into retirement, or whether I want to retire or not was going to happen for me. So it became a great project to work on. But my stuff is more the history stuff. What I've been able to do with Brownie and with the guys who first started with HSE back in the day, and now with Todd Callis and Blummer, is I get to sit with them and watch baseball games, get paid for it. What a gig! I never, my mother could never figure out how I was going to make any money doing, being involved with this stuff. And so I've actually found a way to do that. And my job is to try and make Brownie and Todd look smart. So I hand them things or whatever else. And in the days when the Astros were really bad in 2013, I could find 50 reasons of things I could hand them that they couldn't use because they weren't going to say anything bad about the team. I had plenty of things to go there. But the thing that got me kind of on looking at this was what we don't, I think, look at as far as baseball goes, expansion. And we looked at this as the start of the team. In 1961 and 62, baseball's had 5 expansions in reality since went from 8 teams in each league to going to be what it is now, 30 teams. In its expansion, in 1962 and 1961, there was no blueprint. There was no free agency. There was no draft. There was no given way you're going to build a team. Houston and Washington Senators were unique because they weren't playing in other markets. Houston, more than anything else, was quite removed from everything else that was happening at that point in time. The Angels were playing in Anaheim against the Dodgers. The Mets are playing in New York against the Yankees. They had to go out and look for veteran ball players more so than the Astros and the Senators did. So everybody had a little different approach. The free agent draft, the minor league draft, didn't happen until 1965. So it was trying to get in people's houses and the Astros signing a Rusty Staub, convincing him, yes, we really have a Major League Baseball team in Houston, and we want you to play in our system here. That was not an easy sell in many cases if you weren't in the general area. So how the team was built, there really wasn't a blueprint for it. The Astros, and there were no free agents you could sign to supplement your roster like there are today, and we've seen with the Seattle and Toronto expansions and the ones since then, where you could supplement your rosters or players. The Astros signed a couple of players, I think, from that were old Houston Buffs to try and help beyond that first couple of teams they had. So there was a lot of finessing and figuring out how to make them there. But the Astros went into this with a lot of people who never heard of. And one of the things that I came across, and this is one of the things I keep in my book, I have this big binder I carry when I go out to the baseball game. And it's for weird, obscure facts in case I get a chance to give something to the announcer. And this was, I was talking to the guys at the table about this. We all, being longtime Astro fans, are hold Bob Astromonte to be in high esteem. I did not realize, going back and looking at this, that in the 1963 team, and the Colt 45s were really, really bad in 1963. He actually had 5 walk-off hits. And walk-off hits really aren't you look at, it's a stat, but it's not really a stat. It's hard to find and do this. But I started to do this. Asbrook had, in his 7 years of playing with the Astros, had 11 walk-off hits. That's almost 1.5, almost 2 a year. That's a pretty tremendous number for a really bad team in the 60s. The Astros and Colts were really challenged at that point in time. Another thing that kind of came up in looking at this stuff for me was the deals, the good deals, the bad deals, but also we've been blessed to have really good people at second base. We're going to be having our third, I would expect, Hall of Fame player to play second base for the Astros and Jose Altuve. But second base and then third base was also one of those positions that third base has been very solid for the Astros. And those two positions probably has been their best positions. Astros other than Carlos Correa and Sonny Jackson had not really developed a shortstop they've signed themselves. They've really struggled to have people they always have people they brought in from other teams, but shortstops are generally the best athletes you get. But we talk about some of those things. You brought up about Robert brought up about Brian Bannister and Floyd Bannister. We have a little thing in there about the Astros' first-round draft choices, about the first picks in draft and how they did. Floyd Bannister was their first time the Astros had the first pick in draft. And this was in the middle of Tal's creation of the Arn Farm, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the book. But Tal, what Tal did in the 75 through 77 era when he took over the team there is he was dealing with free agency, which was new. The amateur draft was finally starting to get its right where it belonged, how you can put people into it. Whether people are going to come directly to the majors, whether you're going to spend time in the minor leagues. how that was all going to happen. It was just getting to that point. But what the Astros did in the late 70s was a tear down that really hadn't been done a lot in baseball, because in baseball, the only assets you had were your players. And so trading veterans really wasn't necessarily thought that would be a good idea. So we talked a little bit about those, but those are the sorts of stories that I kind of contributed to this, and some different perspectives on it. But doing the research, I mean, most of it I remember, but I didn't remember it I remember it from being a kid going through it, not from being a little 10,000 foot level and looking back at as much, but kind of fun stuff that way. So, but Brownie, Mike, I enjoyed it. And yes, I'm up whatever you got next. Okay.
Books are available still.
Books are available, yes. You, Mike? Any questions for them? Okay, well, Tony, you want to say anything about the newsletter? And we are still looking for what, one more article? I think that's right. We are always looking for people to contribute to our chapter newsletter. We are always looking for subjects for the newsletter. So the next one is coming out next month, the end of this month. Bob?
Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day. And I think Scott, that's right. Scott sent the email. If Tony Phil sees the shadow, it'll come out earlier or something. So.
All right, I'll just say a few words about the Shooting Stars. As I have been reminded, the Shooting Stars logo, fantastic Major League first class logo, was developed by Mcgraw.
That's right.
It really is pretty good. So our next issue, Groundhog's Day, give me a break. Okay, that's in springtime. So the contents we'll have is something from Bill Brown, a kind of a New Yorker type series article on Hal Smith, which is going to be really good. We'll have a trivia contest. Other articles are being developed. I'm thinking that maybe it might have a few words on the new Hall of Famers. Mm-hmm. It may be good to remember those folks. And some book reports. There's a new great book on the Cleveland Indians in 1948. A lot of things happened. Mr. Robinson was a first baseman for the Indians at that time, and he just passed away. Great hitter, great individual. Anyway, those are some of the things that we're going to have in the next issue. So it should be pretty good.
All right. Good. Please. Sounds good.
Okay.
Tony also won the opportunity to write this month's trivia contest. So while Tony,
some of the guys back here, we see their pictures. They gave us really impossible trivia contests. I would aspire to be that bad. That
Frank Lucas in the library, or is he in the bar?
Okay. Tony, you pass out?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so what I think we can do for those online who want to participate, Tony will read the question.
Question.
And
Joe, are you going to announce about SABR Day or?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Mike's doing a very good job keeping me. I know who he really is.
By the way,
what's that?
I do want to make a comment.
Go ahead, Greg.
I set a record tonight. I was the first member of SABR to ever start the meeting at the meeting and finish in at home on Zoom.
Oh, it's so I got my wallet. I think he's at the bar, and that's a fake tax.
SABR Day in America is February 5th. Chris, your presentation will probably have to hold till next month. Some of the things we've done in the past for SABR Day in America is get together, have like a lunch, exchange books, exchange memorabilia. We can do that. The Roger Hornsby chapter is doing a Zoom thing. We can certainly do that. But I would like to get together if we could on February 5th, either via Zoom or here or something or somewhere, or like a hybrid like we're doing here. We could talk about our favorite baseball books we're reading right now. We talk a little bit about the Dalco book. if somebody wants to go through this and talk about this book a little bit on February 5th, you know, whatever you want to do. February 5th, Saturday.
Baseball fans, we all have a favorite piece of memorabilia with net, and we've each brought a piece of memorabilia and posted it. And once downtown, we took a little meeting room at Jack's Cafe across the street. It is reserved on behalf of SABR for February 5th, should you choose to use it.
Oh, okay.
Where we could meet. And then we've done a book exchange, and I think we even played a baseball game one time, just for fun. But it was just a general get together and talk baseball. And I think we did one for SABR Day and once when we didn't have a meeting in July. Kind of an open forum, but yeah, people have brought gloves, the ball they shot, or the best baseball card, or their baseball card collection. So Mr. Boudreaux has a big one. So that we can do that.
We could exchange Joaquin and Duhar stories.
Joaquin and Duhar, that's right.
Right.
Well, we can do that. I'll send something out and we'll work on it.
Okay.
All right. So time.
All right.
Question.
See?
Yeah.
All right.
Are we doing teams?
What's that?
Are we doing teams?
No, it's every man for himself.
Oh,
Dog eat dog. Okay, I have some trivia questions, which I thought I would specialize in managers tonight, which is a really overlooked topic. So I have a few questions about managers and other things. My first question is this. For many years, Gil Hodges held an unenviable World Series record. Do you folks know what it was?
Yeah.
The second question. Which manager holds the record for most ejections by an umpire? Third.
Well, I mean, online, are y'all getting that?
Yeah, great.
Okay, all right, cool. So,
okay. Third question. Connie Mack managed the Philadelphia A's for 50 years. Who succeeded him? Number 4. John Mcgraw managed the New York Giants for 31 years. Who succeeded John Mcgraw? Walter Alston succeeded Charlie Dressen as manager of the Dodgers. Who succeeded Alston? How many teams were managed by Jimmy Dykes? Dykes was involved in a very famous trade in 1960. What happened? Name the last team owner who also managed his club. On field. And this is a post-1900 question. Which players won the batting title in their leagues with the highest batting average? And secondly, who won the batting title in their respective leagues with the lowest winning batting average? So 3 movie questions.
Say post 1900?
Yeah, post 1900. The 19th century averages were really inflated. As even before the 1860 rules.
So they're both leagues, or just one player?
Oh no, let's do both leagues. American League and National League, the best highest batting average, the lowest batting average for the title. Couple of gimmies here. Number 11, who played Babe Ruth in Babe Ruth story? Number 12, who played Babe Ruth in Pride of the Yankees? And the last one, the question, the movie, The Winning Team. Which actors played Grover Cleveland Alexander and his wife, his long-suffering, faithful wife?
Pretty smart, Alexander. She's pretty cool.
If you win this trivia question, you have to do the next one. Remember that.
Right.
See you, Charles.
Well, no cheating, that's good.
I'm looking at all these.
So guess what? What I do in the past. Yes, I passed.
I'm telling you. Okay, are we done? Any more time?
Her needs more time.
Who does?
She said. Looking up the entry. Yeah, that's right. Well, her has been all shit matters. He's stuck all over the working all the matter. We've been to Canapple the last year.
Okay, I'll provide the answers at this point. For many years, Gil Hodges held an unenviable World Series record. What was it?
Well, that advance is all for Hills.
It was the 21 at-bats in 1952. Even if Perry Crease was break for it at that time. I didn't know this, by the way, he had a small heart attack in 1968.
Oh, yes.
And then, so passed away a few years later. Who was the manager with the most ejections?
Bobby Cox.
Bobby Cox. I number 2 didn't.
Earl Weaver.
Remember what Earl Weaver?
Earl Weaver.
No.
Bobby Cox.
Bobby Cox was number 1. It was John McGraw.
Was what?
He was number 2.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
no, it wasn't, but I thought I'd just throw that in.
Oh,
John McGraw managed the New York Giants for 31 years. Who succeeded?
Number 3.
Oh,
number 3.
Oh, Connie Mack managed. I'm sorry. Connie Mack managed Philadelphia for 50 years. Who succeeded Mack?
Jimmy Dykes.
Jimmy Dykes. John McGraw managed the New York Giants for 31 years. Who succeeded McGraw's manager?
Bill Terry.
Bill Terry. Walter Alston succeeded Charlie Dressen as manager. Who succeeded Alston?
And Schubert won.
How many teams were managed by Jimmy Dykes?
5.
6. Did I hear another number? No, he managed the A's, the White Sox, Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, somebody else.
Wasn't the job.
They always hire me on the Reds.
You got the Reds on there?
Yeah, Cincinnati. He was there with the Reds.
The Reds, the White Sox. What's the right answer?
6. 6. He was involved in a very famous trade himself in 1960.
Frank Lane traded men.
Who?
Charlie Russell.
Oh, I know. Flash Gordon.
That wasn't the question. What happened? That's why it was
In a very famous trade. Frank Lane did this to him. He traded
Joe Gordon.
Traded Jimmy Dykes or Joe Gordon.
Yeah, Joe Gordon.
Detroit is late. Named the last team owner who also managed his club. Oh, I thought I didn't think about it. He still lost. Which players won the batting titles in their league with the highest batting average? Let's try it.
You got me and Roger Floyd.
Well, this is after 1900. That's right.
420 and 420.
That's right. I got it. And the lowest batting average.
Skrensky at 301. George Sternweiss. Man. Skrensky and
Yastrzemski hit 301 in 1968. And his actually Tony Gwynn were at 313.
Yeah, 13.
In 1988.
How many is that one?
1.32. Correct answer. Who played Babe Ruth in Babe Ruth story?
William Bendix.
Who played Babe Ruth in Pride of the Yankees?
Babe Ruth.
These guys are tough. In the winning team, which actors played Grover Cleveland Alexander and his wife?
Very good.
And you played Grover Cleveland Alexander's wife?
Jake Playground. Nancy, right?
No.
Ronald Reagan in a dual role. George Day.
So I don't know how she wound up in that movie, but
That's 2.1 point up. So,
yeah,
1 years. I got a lot of it.
super,
Good word. That was good.
which is a strange combination.
Well,
That's all I got.
Well, let's see. You got both.
See a tally?
I mean, how many answers?
How many people got? Yeah.
How many got 10? Mike, you get 10?
Anybody got 11? 12? Nice.
Well, I think most of these. John, how many did you get?
I got 8. I got 8.
Hey.
8.
So, Mike, it looks like you're the Lucas. Oh, Greg Lucas.
Actually, still counting us out.
Oh, yeah, Greg.
Books. Where are you really?
Marcia?
No, I'm in my office at home. I actually started the meeting with you and then came home. How much, what was the total number you could get?
I think it's 21.
21?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I think I must have gotten 9.
It'll get hard. Mike, I think you look
the team was the most.
16?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, Mike, it's more than anybody, right? Anybody beat 10?
Yeah. I was counting 6 for the Jimmy Dykes team, but they just have people in.
Congratulations, Mike. You get to write the trivia contest for next month. Hey, thank you, Tony. Thank you. Yeah. Speaking of next month, I wanted to make I wanted to talk to you about some SABR Scholars stuff that's going on. Oh, by the way, if you haven't heard, anybody might find SABR has a brand new analytics certification program. Yeah, I can talk. They have a brand new course that you could just, if you want to get certified as a SABR analytics guy. They got a brand new program.
Go for it, Chris.
So there you go. Starts here pretty soon. February 21st. That's right. Bob, Mike, next month, February 21st, third Monday of February. We're going to have a presentation about the history of baseball through postage stamps. Okay. Dan Walsh of the Roger Hornsby chapter had a great presentation. He went on for about 30 minutes. They cut him off. He wasn't able to finish. So I said, hey, man, Mike heard the presentation. Bob heard the presentation. Tal did. Mike had heard. Like, we would really like to hear the whole presentation. So he's going to talk with us next month. 21st. So everybody be here. Come back. And does anybody have anything else?
Yeah. This chapter video, Al Smith's talk is outstanding. And it is available where for us to watch?
It is on YouTube. I can share that the Gilbert Martinez, who runs the chapter, he wrote up the summary of the event where he talked about all the speakers, and Tal has he sort of separates people by he created different YouTube videos. So like Tal's presentation was 55 minutes. It was really great. So I think the chapter website has a link. So I'll share that so everybody can watch it.
Anybody didn't see it, it's well worth it.
Yeah. And tonight's meeting, the link for that will also be available on YouTube. That'll be up in a couple of days. So thank you all.
They taped it.
Yeah, we taped it. Good job, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
I hope you all come next month. And see you then.
Thank you.
What's the date of the next meeting?
February 21st. February 21st. Plus, it's a Saber Day thing they were planning. February 5th.
Chris.
Yeah, so I got the race.